Okay, we've all watched the movies where card counting is portrayed as something dangerous, requiring high-level math skills, and where one is under constant threat of broken kneecaps in a casino backroom. This couldn't be further from the truth. Believe it or not, it's really not a difficult skill to learn, and you don't need unusual mental abilities. All this takes is some practice and dedication, and I'm certain any one of you could learn it. I've never heard of any broken kneecaps this side of 2000 either, so you don't need to worry about that. I make POV card counting videos, but I haven't really delved into the methods and strategy of what I'm doing. I've been wanting to make a video like this for a while, fully explaining what I'm doing and how to learn it yourself. This video is going to be split up into 7 sections. They will be: what is Blackjack, why is it beatable, basic strategy, running count, deck estimation and calculating true count, deviations, and finally bankroll management and EV calculation. Timestamps for each section will be in the description, so if you want to skip to a specific part, go right ahead. Being the most popular card game in the world, most of you probably already know what Blackjack is, but I will touch on it quickly just to be sure. Skip ahead to the number on the screen if you already know how it's played. Blackjack is a card game where you play against the dealer. It uses 52 card decks. Between 1 and 8 decks are used depending on the game offered. Cards are dealt out usually from a shoe, and once almost all the cards are dealt out, they will be shuffled and the game restarted. Some games use a continuous shuffler, which looks like this. The cards are continuously shuffled, hence the name, and these games are not beatable by card counting. Every hand, the player is dealt 2 visible cards and the dealer dealt 1 visible card. The object of the game is to get your hand's total as close to 21 as possible without going over. If you exceed 21, you bust and lose the hand. If you settle for less than 21, and the dealer plays their turn and draws more than you, but not more than 21, you will lose. Each card's number value is equal to the card number itself. Face cards being Jack, Queen, and King are worth 10. Aces are worth 1 or 11 according to the player's choice. A hand that values an ace at 11 is known as a soft total. There's a few playing decisions in Blackjack. You can hit, which means you will draw another card. You can stand, which means you are finished with your hand and will not take another card. You can split if you are dealt 2 cards of the same number value, meaning you separate them to make 2 hands, requiring another bet. You can double your hand, meaning you double your bet, but receive only 1 more card and finish the hand. Doubles can only be done on the first 2 cards of a hand. Some games offer surrender, where you forfeit half your bet for that hand and retire. The player always plays their hand before the dealer. The dealer must always draw to 17. If the dealer has a total of 17, including an ace valued at 11, known as a soft 17, some games require the dealer to stand, while other games require another draw. These games are categorized as hit 17 or stand 17 games, respectively. The dealer will never double, split, or surrender. A player total of 21 on the first 2 cards is a blackjack, and the player wins immediately unless the dealer also has one, in which case the hand ties. In the case of a tie, also known as a push, bets are returned without adjustment. A blackjack beats any hand that is not a blackjack, including one with a value of 21. Wins are paid out at even money except for player blackjacks, which are traditionally paid out at 3-2 odds. Some games pay blackjacks at less than 3-2, and those games are generally not beatable by card counting. Most casinos offer an insurance side bet, which can be placed when the dealer has an ace before they check for blackjack. Insurance bet can be up to half of your original hand bet and pays 2-1. So if dealer has blackjack, insurance will keep you from losing any money on that hand. That is the basics of Blackjack. Now that we're through with that, let's talk about why it's beatable. I will be describing the high-low count system in this video. It is a very effective system and it is what the majority of professional players use. In Blackjack, once a card has been dealt, it is removed from play until the next shuffle. We will not see that card again. This has a measurable effect on the game's odds. Low value cards, which is anything from 2 to 6, do not benefit the player. However, high cards like 10s and aces do benefit the player. They allow more opportunities for high hand totals, successful doubling, and blackjacks being dealt. A card counter will keep track of high and low cards that have been dealt out of the shoe and make betting decisions based on the composition of the cards remaining to be dealt. If many high cards have been dealt out already, the count will be negative, and the player will not have an advantage. Therefore, the counter would keep their bet low. Opposite to that, if many low cards have come out already, the player is more likely to be dealt high cards, which means a higher likelihood of blackjacks, high hand totals, and successful doubles, as I mentioned. At this time, the card counter would raise their bet. This is why blackjack is beatable. A successful counter can raise their bets at times when the game is in their favor. Of course, they won't win every hand when they raise their bet, as the advantage is small, but over many hands it will be apparent and you can beat the casino at their own game. Before you can learn to count, you must first know perfect basic strategy. Basic strategy is a set list of moves for each and every possible hand combination in blackjack. You will never have to guess what the next move is, you simply follow the basic strategy for all your playing decisions. I'm not going to explain every single move, but you can see here that this chart shows the proper playing decision for each and every hand dealt. I know this chart looks daunting if you're a beginner, but trust me, it's easier to grasp than you think. The playing decisions on this chart are the proper way to play blackjack, even as a non-advantaged player. Playing perfect basic strategy reduces the house edge to a mere 0.5% over the player and is the first step to being an advantaged player. By far, the easiest way to learn basic strategy is to memorize this chart line by line. Blackjack Apprenticeship has an excellent free page where they have broken it down into phrases. The way I learned basic strategy was just to learn one of these lines at a time, constantly repeat it in my head until it was locked in, and once I was confident that I had it, I'd move on to the next line. Throughout my day, I would just constantly repeat all the lines that I knew, driving it in even further and continually adding lines to the list. I was very determined to learn and was able to master basic strategy in about 2 weeks of doing this. You absolutely can do it too, it just takes some dedication. Link to this phrase page will be in the description and I highly recommend checking it out. It's definitely the easiest way to learn basic strategy in my opinion. Basic strategy should be automatic and you shouldn't need to think much about it when you're playing. You will need the mental energy for other things when you're counting. This step is crucial to master, so make sure you get it down before trying to progress further. Be aware that there is slight changes in basic strategy depending on if the dealer has to hit a soft 17 or not. I recommend learning both as the changes are very small and it will be worth to know because you will end up encountering both games. And for anyone playing in Europe with no hole card, there's some other changes to basic strategy, so just be aware of the game you're playing and learn the proper chart. Once you've mastered basic strategy, you can start learning the count. As I said earlier, I use the high-low count system. It is one of the easiest to learn and is the most popular method. In high-low, a point value is assigned to low cards, neutral cards, and high cards. The running count is a tally in your head that you update for every single card that is dealt out of the shoe. Low cards are 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Anytime one of these cards is dealt, you will add 1 to the running count in your head. 7, 8, and 9 are neutral cards. These can be ignored when counting as they have a 0 value assigned to them. 10s, face cards, and aces are all high cards. Anytime you see one of these cards come out, you will subtract 1 from the running count in your head. So, for example, if you were dealt 2 6s versus a dealer's 5, that's 3 low cards, and if we add 1 for each of those, the running count would be positive 3. Basic strategy says to split, so let's do that. Now we are dealt 2 face cards on both our 6s, which are each high cards with a value of -1. If we subtract 1 for each of these cards, it would bring the running count down to a positive 1. Basic strategy says to stand both hands, so we do that. Dealer flips a 7, which is neutral and would be ignored, and a 10, which is another high card, bringing the count down 1 for a running total of 0. As a counter, you will constantly be repeating this running count in your head and updating it as cards come out. When counting cards, it is best to wait until both players' cards have been dealt before updating the total. Oftentimes the hand will cancel itself out if it's a high card and a low card, and overall it is about half the mental effort to wait until the second card has been dealt for all players at the table. I always count clockwise, starting with the number 1 spot at the table on the far right, and finishing at the dealer. Make sure you follow the same order for counting every single time. Like, don't count spot 3, then spot 5, then spot 1, etc. Always go clockwise and in the direction of play so that you don't miss or double count a hand. This is one of the more difficult aspects of counting cards. You need to be focused and alert while also not making it obvious what you're doing. A successful counter needs to engage in conversation with people around them and not be hyper-focused on the cards coming out. When you're learning, I highly recommend going to a casino and watching a game of blackjack being played with a full table. Try to keep the count with all the distractions of the casino going on around you. This is a great way to practice discreetly and get a feel for the casino environment. A good way to practice your running count at home is to count through a deck of cards while watching a show or talking with someone. A deck has an equal number of high and low cards, so you should always end up back at zero. When I was practicing back in my early days, I'd always try to have as many distractions around me as possible while I trained. You never know what you'll run into at the casino, and you need to train to be focused. Now I will get into the true count and deck estimation. The running count by itself is not useful. It needs to be converted into the true count. True count is the true measure of player advantage, and for every digit of true count increase, player advantage raises about 0.5%. True count is the running count divided by the number of decks remaining to be dealt. For example, if you're playing a game with 6 decks total, and 4 of them have been dealt out with 2 remaining to go, your deck divisor will be 2. If the running count is 12, you would divide 12 by 2 and your true count would be 6. If you're playing a game that uses 8 decks total and 5 have been dealt, there is 3 remaining. Your divisor would be 3. If the running count was 10, 10 divided by 3 is 3.3 repeating, and your true count would be 3. We will only ever divide into whole numbers. 3 only fits into 10 3 times, so the true count is 3. Even if the answer was 3 and a bit. If you're playing a double deck game and half of a deck has been dealt, your divisor would be 1.5 because there's 1.5 decks remaining to come out. If your running count is 6, 6 divided by 1.5 is 4 and your true count would be 4. You can tell how many decks are remaining to be dealt by looking at the discard tray. Every blackjack table dealt out of a shoe will have this tray. Firstly, you will need to know how many decks are in play, and if you're unsure, you can always ask the dealer. 6 and 8 deck games are the most popular. You will need to eyeball the discard tray and determine how many decks are there. If you're playing a 6 deck game and there are 2 decks in the discard tray, then you know that there's 4 remaining to be dealt, and that means 4 would be your true count divisor, since we are always dividing by the number of decks remaining to be dealt. When you're starting out learning deck estimation, work in 1 deck increments. If more than 1 deck has been dealt, but you're sure it's not at 2 yet, just keep the number of decks dealt at 1. As you get better, you can work down to half deck increments and even quarter deck for some single and double deck games. It's important to be consistent with your deck estimation as you make all your count-based playing decisions based off of it. If you're having trouble with your deck estimation, try to remember that a deck of cards is roughly 15 millimeters tall or 5/8 of an inch. Try to fit these increments into the card stack in the discard tray. This true count conversion allows any blackjack game dealt out of a shoe to be beatable. A true count of any value offers the same player advantage, whether it's in a single deck game or an 8 deck game or anything in between. This step of the learning process can be difficult for some. Deck estimation can be tricky and it will require some practice. It can help to buy your own discard tray and mark it at 1 deck increments. Then just deal to yourself, practicing deck estimation as you go and confirming your answers with your marks. Just remember that for true count conversion, we are always dividing by the number of decks remaining to be dealt, not the number of decks that have been dealt. Now we will get into some count-based deviations. Earlier in this video, we talked about basic strategy. It is the proper way to play blackjack. No matter what hand is dealt, there will be a proper move dictated by basic strategy. However, once you are able to determine the true count, there is some playing decisions that will change. These are called deviations, and they are changes to basic strategy that takes place when the true count is at certain levels. Some popular ones are splitting tens, doubling 10 versus dealer's 10 and ace, standing 16 versus 10, and taking insurance. All in all, there is 18 core deviations, which are the main ones, and I recommend you learn every single one of them. Proper deviations account for about 30% of a card counter's EV. EV is expected value, and it is generated by playing advantage blackjack or any advantaged game. Depending on a number of factors, more on that in the next section. The process for learning deviations is the exact same as learning basic strategy. Blackjack Apprenticeship used to have the phrases available for free, but I can't find them right now. It's no matter because you can just write them out yourself or memorize the illustrious 18 chart line by line. This was the hardest part of the learning journey for me and took the longest to do. But again, with consistency and dedication, anyone can do it. Be aware that the deviations for a stand 17 game and hit 17 game are slightly different. Once again, I'd recommend learning both sets. A great way to practice the entirety of Advantage Blackjack gameplay is on the Blackjack Card Counting Pro apps by Blackjack Apprenticeship. I'm not sponsored by these guys, but they've definitely developed the best app for someone trying to learn. I use this app and a single deck of cards to get to a professional level, so I know it works. Once you've learned your deviations, you now know how to play perfect Advantage Blackjack. But there is one more step to being successful in your endeavor, and that is bankroll management. I'm going to quickly touch on EV here in this section because it goes hand in hand with bankroll management. EV is short for expected value, as I've mentioned. It is the hourly rate at which a game of blackjack is worth depending on its conditions. These conditions include the basic game rules, number of decks in play, how many decks are dealt before a shuffle, speed of the game, and bet spread. The basic game rules that affect EV are as follows. Whether the game is hit 17 or stand 17, if resplit is allowed, if resplit of aces is allowed, if double after split is allowed, if double on any first two cards is allowed, and if surrender is allowed. EV will generally decrease as the number of decks in play increase simply because highly positive counts will occur less. The number of cards dealt before shuffling also has a great effect on EV. The dealer will insert a cut card into the shoe, and once this card is reached during the gameplay, the cards will be reshuffled. This is called deck penetration, and generally you want more than 65% deck pen on a 6 or 8 deck game, and at least 50% on a double deck game, meaning you would see 50% of the cards before a shuffle on double deck, and at least 65% of the cards before a shuffle on a 6 or 8 deck game. 65% penetration on a 6 deck game would mean that 4 of the 6 decks are dealt before the shuffle. 65% penetration on an 8 deck game would mean roughly 5 of the 8 decks would be dealt before the shuffle. Anything worse than that, meaning less cards than that, are dealt before the shuffle, and you'd want to look for a new table, as high true counts are much less likely as the deck penetration worsens. They still can happen, but it's much more rare. Penetration is usually better than that at most places. 1 deck pen for 6 deck is considered pretty good, as is 1.5 deck pen for 8 deck. The game speed, aka the rounds per hour, also plays a large part in the game's expected value. You want your rounds per hour to be as high as possible because it equals more opportunities to place positive EV bets. A quick solo player can do at least 190 rounds per hour in most cases. As soon as there is 2 other players at the table, rounds per hour drops to roughly 90, meaning you're getting half as many rounds in as you would playing solo. This cuts your EV in half. Playing with other players is fine and is unavoidable at times, but you should always try to play with as few as possible. A full table can be as low as 45 rounds per hour. Lastly, bet spread. Your bet spread is a pre-calculated list of bets that you will be betting for each true count interval. As true count rises, player advantage increases, and so do the bets. A proper bet spread is crucial to being a successful AP. You will need to take into account your total bankroll and generate a bet spread that does not put you at risk of losing entire said bankroll. Generally, you want to play with quite a low risk of ruin depending on bankroll size. Risk of ruin is your chance of busting and losing your entire bankroll based on your bet spread and game conditions. It's absolutely possible to lose many bets in a row even if the count is in your favor. As I've said before, a card counter's advantage is small, only a couple percent. It can take hundreds or even thousands of hours to be guaranteed a return. It's most likely you will trend close to your expected value, but that's not always the case. A large bankroll is necessary. Without using any software, a general rule of thumb is that your bankroll should be at least 100 times your maximum bet. If your bankroll is 5,000 and you can easily get your hands on another 5,000 if you were to lose it all, a higher risk of ruin can be okay, say 10 to 20%. But if you're playing with a high 5 or 6 figure bankroll, you will want to play with a sub 1% risk of ruin because you cannot take the chance to lose that much money. To properly calculate EV and risk of ruin based on the game conditions and your bet spread, you will need software. There is a few options for this. The 2 main ones are the Blackjack Apprenticeship Pro Betting Software and CVCX. I use the Blackjack Apprenticeship software, but either would be fine. I'm not going to tell you which one to use. In these softwares, you'd enter your total bankroll, all the game conditions, and your bet spread. Then the software will spit out some numbers for you. The main ones to look at are the hourly rate and risk of ruin. If the risk of ruin is acceptable to you, you can go ahead with playing that bet spread at a game of those conditions. You can lower your risk of ruin even further by not playing whenever the true count is negative, also known as wonging out, but this is sometimes unavoidable if you're the only person at the table. When you're generating your bet spread, most people use a 1 to 10 or 1 to 20 spread. That means your maximum bet would be 10 times what your minimum is on a 1 to 10 spread, and max bet would be 20 times what your minimum is on a 1 to 20 spread. A 1 to 20 spread at $25 minimum would look like this. The bet spread will increase gradually as the count rises, capping out at a true 7 when player advantage is the highest. Betting more above a true 7 is just chasing diminishing returns, so in all cases we stop maximum bets at true 7 and will just continue betting that even if the count was higher. I can't stress this enough that being a successful advantage player is not all about knowing how to play and count. You need to have a plan with your bankroll and play a bet spread that is not too risky. Long losing or break-even streaks are very possible, and you can wipe your career out quickly if you aren't managing your bankroll properly. If you have a perfect game, you will win in the long term, but the short term can be a roller coaster. I'm going to wrap it up there. This is basically all the info anyone needs to get started with card counting and advantage blackjack play. It can be intimidating to get started, but virtually anyone can learn if they dedicate some time and effort to it. In the future, I will post a more advanced video with some more in-depth card counting information, but this is 90% of it. I'm going to post a Q&A prompt in the comments where you guys can ask me questions and I will answer them in a later video. I'll take a second to thank Andrea at Blackjack Advisors for letting me use her table and for dealing to me. Check out her school, there's tons of valuable resources for aspiring advantage players. I hope you found this video informative. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave some feedback. Regular programming will resume shortly. My next POV video is already in the works. I will see you guys then.